All right, so let's break up the periodic table based on its sections. So I have a little animation for you. So this first column right here, this first column minus hydrogen, okay? Because remember, hydrogen's a non-metal. So this first column besides hydrogen are called alkali metals. Okay, so these guys are the alkali metals, and we're going to talk about, we have a slide for each one of these, we're going to go into more depth about them. So these are the alkali metals, column 1A. Column 2A, right here, these are the alkali earth metals, or sometimes they're the alkaline earth metals. So these are the alkali earth metals. This middle box, I already called them this in the last lecture. These are the transition metals. Okay, transition metals, we get it because sometimes they transition. Remember the electron configurations, they change. The last column all the way over here, 8A, these are my noble gases. So 8A is my noble gases. The column right next to it, this is the one with fluorine and chlorine and bromine and iodine and astenine. This column right here are my halogens. Those are my halogens. Okay? These columns don't really have names. Okay? Then the top row here in my F block, these are the lanthanides. So the top one are the lanthanides. And then the bottom in my F block here, my bottom row are my actinides. So you have my lanthanides and you have my actinides. All right, so those are the different names of the rows. So now what we want to do is we want to talk a little bit more in depth about each of these groups. So the first one we said was group 1A. So this was group 1A. Okay. And these were my alkali metals. Remember, not including hydrogen. So hydrogen's here because it has some of the properties in the sense that it has one s electron, and so it has some of the it likes to form a cation versus an anion. It has some properties, which is why it's put in that first column. But then some of its properties make it go on the other side, like it being a non-metal. So it's obviously, since it's a non-metal, it's not going to be an alkali metal. These are all my metals. All right? So some properties about these guys. They're soft. They have a low melting point, low melting points. They have a low density. These guys are very reactive. They're so reactive that you never find these uncombined in nature. So to get them by themselves, we have to find them combined. Like for example, sodium, most of the time it's in salt, NaCl. So I'll have the salts and then I have to like pull out the sodium. So I have to kind of purify and break apart the compound to get the pure guy. So you're not gonna just find some sodium just laying around. Okay? It's always gonna be reactive with somebody. And these guys tend to form water-soluble compounds. Water-soluble means it can dissolve in. And so water-soluble means it's going to dissolve in water. So think about the fact that if it forms, it likes to form this type of compound. So sodium is going to form with chlorine to make sodium chloride. So it's a sodium compound that dissolves in water. Because you can put your salt in water, okay? So just some pictures, lithium, this is kind of what it looks like, pure sodium, etc. So that's my first group, my alkali metals. So let's move on to my next group, my alkali earth metals. So remember, this was group 2A, okay? So alkali earth metals, or you might even see alkaline earth metals, either one is fine, just kind of depends on which book you're looking at. Now let's talk about these. We're going to compare this group to the first group. So we're going to compare 2A to 1A. So when I said that 1A was soft, this is going to be all in comparison to group 1A. These guys are harder. It's not necessarily hard, they're just harder. Have higher melting points. And they're more dense when we're comparing them to group 1A. So they're not necessarily really hard or have high boiling points or really dense on their own. They're just higher than the other group. They're also reactive, but less than group 1A. So they're reactive, but they're not as reactive as group 1A is. Group 1A is very reactive. And these guys like to form stable, insoluble oxides. So what that means is insoluble means it's not going to dissolve. So if you dumped it in water, it's just going to float around. Like if you were to dump like a rock into water, doesn't dissolve. And they like to form with oxygen. So what that means is most of the time, you're gonna have like magnesium with oxygen. So magnesium oxide, calcium oxide, etc. So most of the time you're gonna see it not just pure, but with oxygen combined. All right, and so these are my alkaline earth metals: beryllium, magnesium, calcium, strontium, and barium. And then this would be if you were to take a strip of magnesium, you could kind of burn it, or just here's some calcium right here. All right, so those are my first two columns of my metals, my alkali metals and my alkaline earth metals. We're not gonna really get into the transition metals. That's a whole other class you could actually take here at LSMSA. That would be inorganic chemistry. And it focuses a little bit more on the transition metals. On the next lecture, we're gonna talk about that far right group, those two that we showed, halogens and the noble gases.